Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody. And today we're going to be looking at the rise of the Craftworld Alaitoc, and we're going to be looking at the state of the Craftworld in Nephilim. And I actually think that the Alaitoc Craftworld is a sleeper Craftworld that has gone under the radar for a little bit as far as competitive play. But I actually think the Alaitoc have the potential to be one of the most powerful Craftworlds after the changes. And I've always thought since the new codex was released in 9th edition that Alaitoc was a pretty powerful army in its own right, and it could be played very competitively. And I actually still think this is the case after Nephilim. In fact, I think comparatively they are even better. So let's get right into it and talk about why I think the Alaitoc Craftworld is on the rise after Nephilim. So in this video, we're going to be going over a refresher of the Craftworld traits, Warlord trait, relic, and stratagem of the Alaitoc. And we're also going to be just talking about in general why Alaitoc is in a great position after the changes in the Nephilim expansion. And like I said, I think actually the changes have been better in general for the Alaitoc. I don't think they've been nerfed too much as far as their points cost and upgrades and stuff like that. So let's get right into it. So the Alaitoc army bonus or Craftworld trait is Fieldcraft. Basically, all units outside of 12 inches get light cover against range attacks. This is massive. This basically gives your entire army +1 to their armor against range outside of 12. This is fantastic for a lot of different things, but especially for units that can't normally benefit from being in light cover. So things like vehicles, things like support weapons, stuff like that. Even Wraith Lords can benefit from light cover now in the Alaitoc Craftworld, which is massive because normally terrain features do not allow for vehicles, monstrous creatures, and other types of units to benefit from it. The next part of it is that all infantry and biker units get dense cover against range attacks if outside of 12 inches and completely within terrain. And this essentially just makes your infantry units that would probably be trying to be in cover anyway even more powerful. Think about it. If you have a unit in light cover, not only are they getting the bonuses of that terrain piece, but they're also getting dense cover as well automatically. And just for the heck of it, they're also getting light cover again. So, I mean, not that that matters, it doesn't stack, but basically what this means is your infantry are going to be a lot harder to kill. And this includes things like Wraithguard and Wraithblades. A lot of people don't factor this in, but Wraithguard and Wraithblades in terrain in this Craftworld will get +1 to their armor save as well as -1 to hit. That is pretty huge. Also, an unsung part of this Craftworld trait is the fact that all units ignore negative modifiers to movement and advance rolls. And essentially what this means is things like difficult terrain, psychic debuffs, etc. Anything that debuffs your movement now can be completely ignored. So let's say your enemy has a movement debuff, that can be completely ignored. Let's say that you're moving through difficult terrain, that debuff can be completely ignored. So all your units are moving at full speed pretty much no matter what, with the exception of base stat modifiers. So let's say one of your vehicles, your Wave Serpents, gets wounded and goes below a certain amount of wounds, goes below 6 wounds. That Wave Serpent is going to be moving at a reduced speed. That's not a modifier, that's just a straight up debuff to your stats. So unfortunately, it doesn't count as an actual modifier. It's not like a +1 to hit or a -1 to hit, or a +1 movement, -1 movement. It's just simply changes the actual data slate and stat line of the model. So that doesn't or isn't affected. But any kind of debuffs that give you a -2 or a -3 or -1 or whatever, you are going to be able to ignore this. The Alaitoc Warlord trait is Master of Ambush. Now basically this allows the Warlord to select one unit within 9, and that unit can shoot and still perform action. So basically defensive tactics for Dire Vengers, but you can do it on any core unit. And it allows you to redeploy one unit of Rangers, which can be absolutely great for seeing openings to score on secondary objectives if your opponent leaves them open. So for example, if you deploy your Rangers on one side of the board and your opponent leaves one other board edge completely open, well, you can use one of your Rangers to redeploy to that side and then possibly get the benefits of stuff like scout the enemy or retrieve Nephilim beta, whichever one you guys pick up for your secondary objective. The Alaitoc relic is the shift shroud of Analyser, and this basically makes a character untargetable by range attacks as long as they benefit from cover and are outside 12 inches. And basically, because of the Alaitoc traits, your character is always going to be under the benefits of cover anyway when enemies are shooting at them outside of 12 inches. They're always going to at least benefit from light cover. So that means that this character is completely untargetable. Now, here's the cool thing about this ability. It is not affected by the bodyguard nerfs in match play, which basically means that this does not convert into something like a bodyguard special role. It is a simple, you can't target this character. So if we read it, it says cannot be selected as a target of a ranged attack unless it is the closest eligible target for that attack and it's within 12. So that is extremely useful. It allows your warlord to be much safer from range attacks and doesn't really have to worry as much about getting sniped out by a lot of different stuff. What's really cool about this especially is that you can use this in conjunction with psychic secondaries and stuff like that, like psychic interrogation and warp ritual, to make sure your character can't be shot at after being exposed to those secondary objectives. And lastly, we have Pathfinder Ambush. This is the stratagem for the Alaitoc. This allows a unit of Rangers to be kept in strategic reserve to deploy when your opponent sets up reinforcements. So kind of like a counter reinforcement a little bit. Now, I actually don't think this is the best way to use it, but it can be used to essentially get a unit of Rangers on the board wherever you want later in the game. It also allows a unit of Rangers to shoot at the enemy unit that came in via reinforcements. Now, this unit of Rangers does not have to be set up in strategic reserve. This unit of Rangers can already be on the board, and essentially, there's no minimum range to this. So that means that that unit of Rangers can shoot at that enemy unit no matter where it is on the board, as long as you have line of sight to it and you have range to it. So it's not the greatest stratagem, obviously, because Rangers aren't that powerful at shooting, but it does give them an extra couple shots at them, and perhaps maybe you'll kill a model or two and make them a little bit harder to get charges off and get damage off on your models. So it's not too bad if you can spare the command points for it. And unlike Forewarned, the enemy does not have to be within 12 of your unit. The enemy just has to come in via reinforcements, and it's basically unlimited range from there, I should say. So your Rangers can shoot them, as long as the Rangers themselves are in range. So why exactly is the Alaitoc in a strong place after Nephilim, right? I mean, they didn't get any real direct buffs, right? None of their main units got point decreases or anything like that. So why are they so powerful or in such a strong position? So I think there's basically 4 reasons why they're in such a strong position now. One of them is that the D-Cannon and Ranger Resonator shard combo is much more durable and easier to pull off in the Alaitoc Craftworld. And I talked about this a little bit in my Alaitoc Craftworld video that I made. Essentially what this is that Rangers are really good at setting up D-Cannons to be very accurate with the Resonator shard stratagem to reroll hits. And it's much easier to pull off in the Alaitoc Craftworld because Rangers are so much better. And Shroud Runners, which were possibly one of the better units with Alaitoc before the changes, are now comparatively much better than Wind Riders with scatter lasers for their points, and are even better in Alaitoc. So that's a real boon. The other thing is, untargetable characters with the Alaitoc relic is extremely powerful and allows you to use things like warp ritual and psychic interrogation much safer. And lastly, because of the various amounts of charge and movement debuffs and prevention that the Alaitoc Craftworld has access to, close combat armies are going to be exceptionally affected, and they're going to struggle against a well put together Alaitoc list. And those armies include the new codexes of Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Demons, which are both heavily, well, not so much Chaos, but definitely Chaos Demons are going to be heavily close combat oriented. And even the Chaos Space Marine Codex has some nasty close combat units. Possessed, for example, are extremely nasty and can assault from long distances. Movement debuffs are going to be very important to keeping your units alive, and Alaitoc has this in absolute spades. So the D-Cannon and the Resonator Shard combo, again, like I said, is much more durable and easier to pull off with the Alaitoc. Both the D-Cannons and Rangers get significant boosts to their durability, which means that even if you go second, your Rangers are going to be more likely to survive to be able to pull off this combo. And with the Master of Ambush Warlord trait, you can easily redeploy your Rangers to be in range of Resonator Shard if they were not already, and you can save your Phantasm redeployment for other units. And as D-Cannons are one of the most powerful anti-tank options in our codex currently, especially with the Nephilim changes, they are much more powerful and competitive comparatively with the other units that we have in our army that are anti-tank like Fire Dragons and Fire Prisms. This combo is especially potent in the Alaitoc Craftworld. Then, of course, Shroud Runners are now comparatively much more effective than Wind Riders with scatter lasers for their points cost. And, like I said, they're even better in the Alaitoc Craftworld. I do think Shroud Runners really have their home in the Alaitoc Craftworld. So Shroud Runners are only 5 more points than Wind Riders with scatter lasers. And here's what they get for that cost. They get +1 ballistic skill, +1 wound. They have a Ranger long rifle, which gives them an additional attack. They can benefit from light cover, just like infantry can. They have access to a special stratagem, which reduces enemy movement speed and charge speed, and does more wounds. They can get a pre-game move to allow them greater versatility in the early game to get out of trouble and stuff like that, basically redeployment. And they also can negate enemy cover saves if the enemy unit is within 12 and there's an outcast unit shooting against them. Now, of course, this is probably the least effective advantage for the Shroud Runners, but nevertheless, it is still something. And because Alaitoc typically has a lot of Ranger type units, including the Shroud Runners themselves, this can negate a significant amount of armor from the enemies that you're shooting at. So with all these bonuses combined, it's hard to see why anybody would really take Wind Riders with scatter lasers in an Alaitoc style list over Shroud Runners, just because of the vast amounts of different bonuses that the Shroud Runners get over the Wind Riders for a very low cost. The other thing about Shroud Runners is that, and what I think is probably the most important in an Alaitoc list, is their ability to debuff enemy movement with their stratagem wire weave grenades. And especially if you have a couple of units of Shroud Runners, you can be doing this as long as the Shroud Runners stay alive. So close combat armies, Chaos Demons, the upcoming Chaos Demons, who are going to be pretty powerful with their new codex, and Chaos Space Marines, who have more than a few close combat units, are going to be very hard pressed to actually get into combat with your units. And also the Untargetable character relic, the Shift Shroud, I should say, for psychic actions is absolutely amazing because of the increased effectiveness of psychic secondaries in Nephilim for the Eldar. So basically makes a character extremely hard to hit after using psychic actions that may leave them exposed. Psychic interrogation and warp ritual come to mind to me to be the best secondaries to use this in conjunction with. However, I will just say this. There are a lot of secondaries which you can basically ensure that you can get with characters that have this and basically be immune to range attacks. So just keep in mind that you can use different secondaries, like for example, behind enemy lines. You can get your character behind enemy lines and essentially them be there the entire game as long as there's no enemies within 12. And essentially you can use this to score very easily on that secondary objective and possibly even max out your points with it just because you have this relic. So very powerful relic to have, very useful, and very good for getting out of sticky situations where having Lookout Sir might not be enough. And lastly, the Alaitoc have a lot of charge and movement debuffs and prevention that allow them to be exceptionally useful against preventing enemies from getting objectives, as well as preventing enemies from getting charges off on you. So Rangers with Wire Weave Nets and Shroud Runners with Wire Weave Grenade stratagem basically make charging and movement very difficult. So I know the Wire Weave Nets recently got a nerf, but I think that Rangers in a Alaitoc list, it's still probably useful to still include that upgrade. And the reason why I say that is because Alaitoc revolves around denying and debuffing enemy movement and making it extremely hard for enemies to actually pursue you. And because of this, the Wire Weave Nets fit perfectly into this strategy. Units cannot charge you, essentially, without taking damage and taking the risk that their charge will fail. So if there's a Chaos Space Marine possessed unit that is about 8 inches away and it has a pretty good chance of getting in there for a charge, being able to debuff their charge distance by D3 makes the possessed unit think twice about even trying in the first place. Also, Alaitoc can push this even further with things like Restrain and Redeployment to hinder combat even further, create more distance between yourself and enemy units, and generally just make it much harder for your enemy to do much of anything against your list as far as combat goes. And these combinations of debuffs to movement and charging will be extremely useful against the new Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Demons, both of which I guarantee you are going to be very strong and are going to have a very big close combat element in most lists. Especially things like Possessed, which are specialized close combat units that are very fast. They have Strength 5, Toughness 5, and will win most combats, even against units like Striking Scorpions and Howling Banshees. So you have to be careful about that, and screening units of Rangers to stop these things and debuffing the charge distance is going to go a long way towards helping you be successful against these new codexes. So, in conclusion, I think Alaitoc is one of those Craftworlds that has fallen under the radar when compared to the, I would say, big three, which are Uthway, Bealtan, and Hail of Doom lists in competitive play. However, I think their mix of defensive buffs and synergy with Rangers and D-Cannons make them very viable competitively. And I would actually wager that you might see Alaitoc a couple times being played in tournaments just because of the fact that their Craftworld traits are so strong and the fact that Shroud Runners are just so powerful with these guys, and with Chaos Space Marines and Chaos Demons being excellent in close combat, the ability to deter them from close combat and prevent them completely from engaging you is a very powerful tool to have in your pocket. Also, I think just in general, the Craftworld traits were and still are very strong, especially against shooting style armies. Your infantry units in terrain are basically going to be getting the benefits of light and dense cover at the same time. So that's an extremely powerful buff. And a lot of people underwrite this and say, well, -1 to hit isn't that big of a deal, right? And yes, on 1 or 2 units that are in terrain in your army, that would be correct. But if you're playing with a lot of terrain, dense cover for your infantry units is very powerful. It's your entire army. So just keep in mind that your infantry units are going to be much more durable against enemy attacks at ranged. And you have a very strong ability to prevent enemy charges and things like that, and enemy movement with the debuffs from both Rangers with Wire Weave Nets, the Restrain Psychic Power, and also the Wire Weave Grenade stratagem from your Shroud Runners. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. And just to let you guys know, I did run the Alaitoc Craftworld several times this weekend and had a lot of success with it still. It's still very powerful. I did have to make a couple of tweaks to essentially make sure that I could afford my Wire Weave Nets, but it wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't have to really take too much out of my army. So just keep that in mind also, that most Alaitoc lists are not going to be suffering in the same way that other lists would because of the increase in price to Aspect Warriors. Aspect Warriors can still be very effective in Alaitoc, obviously. I really like the combination of things like Warp Spiders in Alaitoc lists, but again, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I think I had to take out 2 Rangers in my list, and I was pretty good. So you won't have to make too many changes in general. And I do have some more videos coming out this week. I have one on the Nephilim missions. So both the Incursion and Strike Force missions will be covered in this video. I also have a video coming out about something a little different, about some historical comparisons between Eldar and Ancient Greece, which we'll go into in that video. A little bit of a fun video, not really so much about rules and strategies and stuff, but just about the inspiration behind Eldar. And I will also be doing a video on Dark Reapers and possibly on the Phoenix Lords and seeing what synergies they have with different units. And that's it for today. So I will see you guys next time. As always, if you have any comments or questions or concerns or anything like that, please do leave them in the comment section. I'd love to hear your guys' take on a lot of this stuff. And let me know what you guys think about the Alaitoc Craftworld. All right, everybody. Peace out and have a good one. See you guys later.